Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, I think it's pretty obvious to most people that the issue we're talking about here is not a partisan issue. Do you agree with me in that regard?
I do, and I really do appreciate the bipartisan cooperation that we've seen here on the new legislation and just in supporting my work and the work of my office in this whole portfolio.
I appreciate that. There are some loud voices who dissent about any involvement in Ukraine, and they get a lot of ink, but my experience up here in Congress is that that's a pretty thin layer. Are you in agreement with that, with your dealings with Congress?
I do. I feel like I've had nothing but support from many of the members and the staffers that I've spoken with.
I appreciate that. Interesting, both the chairman and I talked about in our opening statements the fact that for whatever reason, the Department of Defense is pushing back on doing what we, Congress, told them to do. And as the chairman has indicated, we're not going to tolerate an agency saying, well, we don't like that law, so we're not going to enforce it. So we will be doing something about that. The other thing I would point out, for the record here, is that I was intimately involved in drawing that legislation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when you're dealing with the ICC, you're always cognizant of the fact that there could be pitfalls and that there could be a problem putting U.S. Servicemen in jeopardy. We scrupulously avoided that and had specific language to see that that didn't happen, yet we wind up with the same criticism after it's passed. Again, I want to note for the record, I was not contacted by anybody from the Department of Defense as we drafted that legislation. We didn't draft it under a bushel basket. It was out in the open. We put out the text. Nobody came forward and said this was a problem. And now they're talking about it being a problem. So I hope you'll join us in pressing them to do what certainly needs to be done here.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I agree that the legislation is very carefully crafted. It's surgical, in fact, and all of the other protections of the American Service Members Protection Act remain in place. In addition to the more than 100 bilateral treaties that the State Department negotiated with partners in which the various parties promised not to refer their nationals to the court. And so all of those protections remain in place. There are ways that we can provide assistance without jeopardizing U.S. personnel.
Well, and that's exactly what it was designed to do. It was to provide assistance without in any way affecting the other strong provisions that have been in place for many, many years and have worked very well. So glad to hear you reiterate that, and we will be reiterating it with the Department of Defense soon. Could you go into, with your background and experience and legal training, could you talk about in detail how an international tribunal for the crime of aggression could be established to address Russia's actions in Ukraine? And I'm talking about now something, I guess what I envision in that regard is something separate from ICC.
Right.
I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts on this.
You're exactly right that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over the crime of aggression in this matter because Russia has not ratified the Rome Statute. So that has given rise to proposals to establish a dedicated special tribunal in this regard. The Ukrainians see the crime of aggression as the original sin, essentially, that unleashed all of the other war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Rightfully so.
And rightfully so, and that's why we are indeed supporting the creation of this. As we looked at the different models, and as I drew upon my own academic experience, but my experience as a practitioner with international and hybrid tribunals, I was guided by 5 main principles. Number 1, we want to maximize accountability for the crime of aggression. Number 2, we want to create an institution that is nimble and efficient in its ability to work. Number 3, we want to create an institution that is legally sound within the UN Charter system and under the extant international law. Number 4, we want to make sure that this is complementary to other efforts that are out there, including the ICC, but also the International Center for the Prosecution of Aggression that has been stood up in The Hague. And then finally, we want to garner widespread cross-regional international support for this effort. And so in looking at all of those factors and at the various models, we have landed upon a proposal for an internationalized special chamber or special tribunal that would be deeply rooted within the Ukrainian national system, but would benefit from assistance from a number of international sources. States, even private sector, could be assisting this endeavor. This could take the form of secondments of personnel in the way that the United States has always done with international courts and courts around the world. It could take the form of funding, information sharing, cooperation. This entity could be based outside of Ukraine for security reasons, but then moved back into Ukraine when the time was ripe. And it has the added benefit of continuing to invest in the Ukrainian judiciary, judicial system, prosecutorial authorities, et cetera, which we know will pay long dividends into the future as Ukraine continues to modernize and to reform itself and to align itself with the rest of Europe. And so that is why we have and are proposing an internationalized tribunal. So we are promoting this in an entity called the Core Group that Ukraine has convened in order to bring experts together, both at a diplomatic level but also at a technical level, to explore the various models and to try and find a consensus to be able to move forward.
Yeah, that's a really important effort. I know I'm out of time, but I want to pursue one more question, if I might. I was fascinated, as we all know, common law develops, whether it's the Anglo-Saxon common law, whether it's international law. And I was fascinated by I think it was the Germans' use of what one would call international jurisdiction or unified jurisdiction. I forgot the exact name that they used. And they actually used it and convicted some people as a result of atrocities in Syria. First of all, are you familiar with the concept? I assume you are.
Yes.
And then secondly, is there some thought given to using that as a jurisdictional foundation for this type of an organization we're thinking about setting up?
Yeah, you're referring, I think, to universal jurisdiction or extraterritorial jurisdiction. The United States has that in our own penal code. We call it present-in jurisdiction because we do have usually an added requirement that the defendant be present here in the United States. But it doesn't matter the nationality of the perpetrator, the nationality of the victim, or the place where the crime was committed. Because these are international crimes, all states have been essentially deputized to prosecute these crimes. So I'm very familiar with the German experience. It has been remarkable to see. They have been able to move against high-level figures of the Assad regime in Syria and also members of ISIL who have found themselves in Germany. And they have, I think in many respects, inspired other European states to utilize crimes that were on the books but that had not really been used. Aggression does not work as well under that model, precisely because many states have not codified the crime of aggression in their domestic penal codes. Ukraine does have a provision. It's sort of a sovereign trespassing kind of a provision, and they are doing some active prosecutions now for that crime within their domestic system. But I think they would like to see an internationalized effort because they see Russia's war as not just an assault on their territory, but an assault on the whole international rules-based order, the UN Charter system writ large. And they want the international community involved in this effort. So that's a secondary reason to, I think, pursue more of an internationalized body that would have a lot of international support.
I guess I wouldn't be as concerned. I detected you're a bit concerned with countries not having a specified statute in place regarding this. I guess where we're plowing new ground on this new jurisdictional idea, I guess I wouldn't be as concerned about the fact that other countries did not necessarily have that in their body of law. So hope you'll give that some thought.
Yeah, it just means they would have to prosecute for war crimes or crimes against humanity, and often you can imagine cumulative charges that would make perfect sense. Many of the acts of aggression are being committed by virtue of war crimes, right? Attacks on critical elements of the civilian infrastructure. So it can be done, is the short answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.